So we're at the machine and we want to get ready to stitch. But if you're using a thread like me that you haven't used much or used before, I just loaded this on my long arm and I haven't practiced with the tension. So I am using a magnetic bobbin like I showed y'all earlier. These are the Magneglide bobbins. It's got the magnet on the one side, which is the black, and the teal on the other side, and it goes into your bobbin case with a black magnet against, and that helps to create more resistance as the bobbin spins, so you get less random eyelashes and backlashing back from the bobbin overspinning. So let's just maybe see about tacking this down. Now, if you are tacking down a quilt top, okay, if you float your quilt like I do not put my top layer on any kind of extra bar. You need to, when you baste, to work your way from the bottom to the top. So oftentimes I will check my tension after I tack off my threads. Okay, let me get some scissors here. Make sure you have thread snips. I'm not sure if I said that in the video earlier or not. Okay, and we will baste from the bottom up. Reason being is this pulls our quilt up and out so that when we get to the bottom it doesn't draw in and you get a bunch of wavy borders even when your quilt was pretty square when you started. So I'm going to stitch enough to get my machine out of the way. Okay. So far my thread isn't getting caught on anything, and I just feel it on the bottom. I don't see the white poking up through the top. And if we fold this over, there's really no pink coming through the bottom. The pink is actually sitting right in the middle of the quilt sandwich. You can just kind of see it through the open holes. So that is gonna totally be fine. Something weird just happened? It did. Okay, now normally I would just tack off my threads and come from the bottom and go up. But if you do end up coming down, on your next pass, do it opposite. Come up on your right and down on your left. I love this hologram thread. So this thread is super weird. I don't know if y'all saw my rose video. It's only weird because it's flat. It's like linguine. It looks like tinsel. So I thought for sure that's not gonna work well in my machine, but as I've been using it, I've had greater luck with this than I have with a traditional metallic type thread. So this hologram thread is a Wonderfill thread. The spool is kind of tiny and it costs $8, but I mean, I did the whole placemat last time with this and I barely made a dent. It's a really fine weight thread. I think you get like 328 yards or something for $8. But it definitely is worth it when you use it. It's for accent quilting. It's not for stabilizing quilting. If you're going to give this to a 2-year-old, you don't want to give them a metallic thread quilted top because they're going to roll around with it in the mud and do all kinds of crazy things that you're not going to want to worry about those threads possibly breaking. This is to accent like a show quilt or a table runner or something that isn't going to be too crazy. So now let's see how our thread looks on our y-axis and our x-axis, and let's just do it all around, do some loops. So I feel the top, and the top feels nice. Okay, you can feel a difference. And when I feel the bottom, I don't feel the thread. I feel the texture, much like I do on the top. So if I just look underneath, I've got a couple areas where it is poking through just a bit, but that's a directional tension issue, so I might tighten my top just a smidge because there's really almost no tension on this thread at all. It's a little sticky going through your tension disc, and that might help a little bit, but I had just a little bit of an issue on the outside part of the curves. Okay, so now this is a directional tension issue, right? Your machine likes to stitch from left to right, and it has a harder time stitching from right to left. So there's going to be excess tension on your machine because of the deflection of your needle and how it interacts with your bobbin case. This is actually so tough to pull through here. Alright, so I've mentioned that I'm using this hologram thread, and tension still looks good underneath. There's no pink poking through. My needle is a size 4.5. It's got a bigger eye in the needle because that 4.5 is a bigger hole, right, in the eye of the needle, that it allows my thread extra time as it goes in and out of the bobbin, so that there's less friction in the eye of the needle that could potentially cause that thread to shred and break. So we want to make sure that if you're using a home sewing machine, you get an embroidery needle that you can use. That one's really great. What is it? The chrome coated ones are great too because they don't really get hot. If you're using a long arm machine, be careful with the titanium needles. If you're on an APQS machine, you can just use the normal Graz Beckert gold needles, and you'll want to get a 4.5 if you're using a hologram. Otherwise, get the right size needle to fit the thread you're using. Alright, so let's practice stitching some designs. So let's start with a pebble. We're going to make a pretend arch. Okay, we're just doing this in our extra space that we have on our quilt top, and we're going to practice doing pebbles from a very small area to a very large area. And it's good to get some practice runs in there, so you can try to get that spacing down so they're not too far apart. If you're using a contrasting thread like I am, you're going to see every little inclusion, quote unquote, as I like to say, like a needle, like a diamond. Diamonds have lots of inclusions, but that you know, doesn't make them any less beautiful. And you just practice until you can get down, getting those pebbles nested just right. So remember, it's just a figure 8 design. Come up and around, backtrack where you just previously stitched, do another circle in the opposite direction, backtrack. Okay, and what that does is when you backtrack top, bottom, top, it disperses the backtracking thread so that your eye isn't only focusing on this top portion of your pebbles, but it kind of just makes your eye believe that that's supposed to be there and it's normal to look at. Okay, so pebbles are one of the easier ones to do, as well as the back and forth. Those are the gentle S curves, so we'll just fill in the space here because we use the back and forth in our arrows in the middle of our hexagon. Gentle S, come up and curve. And I'm also doing this practice not only just to warm up, but also as a means to check my tension and stuff when I'm done. So I've given myself a little bit of an extra area to work within. Okay. Next, we want to practice our concentric circle design. That's one of the more difficult ones to do, but once you understand the backtracking portion, it'll be very easy for you to facilitate once you understand how to move around the design. That's the hardest part, is understanding where to go next. Okay? Just gonna go down here. And we're going to start with our first circle. Come up and do a big old circle, tuck it in. Give yourself enough space to travel on the inside and get out. You have two ways to do this. If you travel on the outside, you come up. If you travel on the inside, you end up on the other side. Like I said with the swirls, you just have to know where you want to end. You'll backtrack a little bit on where you stitched previously till you get to a space where you want to put in another circle. Come up and do the circle, come back around and down. And again, practicing is great because it loosens you up. See how even these are starting to get? Backtrack, 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 okay? Now I don't want to put a swirl out here, so what I'm going to do is I want to get more this direction to put another swirl. So we're going to come out and around. So we've just backtracked like a whole 1.5 inches on that same line. Come up and do another one. Come out and touch. So the other thing you have to remember is now this is an open space. You want to do at least one more line around so that you close off that circle. And now that looks like a finished circle. Now I want to come back this way. You can echo as many times as you want and make those circles as big or as small as you want and use those echoes to travel. I could have stayed over here to make another one, but instead I pulled it back around so that I can continue to quilt this way. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to travel all the way back here when you know you still need to fill in this little area. So I'll backtrack on this line where I already backtracked, put a little curve, then come out and finish her off. Now, what you're seeing right now is very normal, especially for beginners, right? When you start the design and you end up making like a flower around it and you just keep making like flowers of swirls everywhere, that's very common. It happens all the time. When I first started quilting, this was very much what I would do, and I had to eventually teach myself to stop doing that. So instead of putting another swirl right here where they all kind of lap around this same one, I would backtrack here and then do my next swirl. Okay, and then I would just kind of do one or two of these bad boys and echo just to fill in that space, and then I would do some more circles out that way. So that's how you do the concentric circle. And again, you're going to see me stitch this out a lot more on the actual quilt top that we're practicing, but I wanted to give you a good basis that you could start to do the designs and practice with. So let's travel back around. All right, let's get a swirl in here. So we're gonna come up and do a gentle S curve, tuck it into a C, and then this shape right here that you're creating right here in the middle is a lot like these over here. So remember, if you travel on the inside, you ended up on the left of the design. If I traveled on the inside again, I would end up on the left of this curve. Instead, I'm going to travel on the outside. And now I'm on the right side of the curve. So because I have more area over here to quilt, that's where I want to go. And then I'll just echo and do another one. Sometimes a lot of times they're not this big, unless you're using them as a giant part of your negative space. can change up the sizes. They don't have to be the same size. If you're very particular about them all being the same size, kudos to you. I do not have the patience for that. I'm going to close up this area, and sometimes it's helpful to just kind of echo to do another one. But I want you to kind of get a feel for how I get these in there. Sometimes I'll do tiny ones. I probably wouldn't have done a tiny one in here. Probably would have just did another line and came back out, backtracked, did another swirl. So I could get here. Then I would do another swirl off of this one. I ran out of bobbin. But you get the idea. My needle's getting kind of hot too, and the thread's still doing pretty well. This hologram thread is amazing. I can't stop saying enough about it because every time I've tried to quilt with a metallic type, beautifully shiny thread, I've had a lot of issues. So that's pretty much how you do all of the different designs. The arrows and the arches are very straightforward. We're going to utilize rulers to do those. So I'm not going to bore you with that now, but I wanted you to get a feel for how the designs kind of work, and then we will practice doing them on the quilt top a lot. So before we get started, please ensure that you have a ruler base on your machine. You can tell my base is really wide. Most machines are just this length because I have a APQS Millennium and it has a thread cutter attached to the base, so it's wide, which is super cool because my ruler base is that much wider and it gives me a lot of stability when I'm doing my designs. And it just fits on there nice and snug. Now, if you have a Hartley base like this for your APQS and it is not snug and it jiggles around a lot, if you notice, I took a command strip and some Velcro. Can we see that? Yeah, there we go. And it's the soft side of the Velcro, and I taped it with a command strip on there so that if it didn't work, I could take it off, but it works beautifully and I don't need to. Perfect width. Sits on there nice and snug. And up until right now, I have not had any issues with it. All right, there we go. There we go. And then there's very little to no play. So you want to have a ruler base, and then you want to get out your straight and your curved ruler. If you don't have one, there's lots of different sites that you can get them on. You don't need a specific ruler to do this workshop. You just need to have at least 4.5 inches for whatever curved ruler you're working with, and a nice size ruler that you feel comfortable holding and doing the designs with. All right, so now I've got my ruler base on. I'm ready to do some ruler work. I have put a little piece of, this is black poly batting. It doesn't really matter what kind of batting you have as long as it's not the super fluffy stuff. And I'm going to attach a side clamp to my machine. Now these aren't quite big enough for the machine I have because I had these on my previous long arm, so they could be a couple inches wider. But if you notice, these are called red snapper side clamps. Okay, if you've never heard of these, you don't have to have the whole red snapper system to load them, but if you notice, I have got a nice long flat bar of tension on here. I put the batting on there because my red snappers don't clamp down tight enough on just the backing fabric. Lots of people's red snappers do. They haven't had any issues with them. Sometimes they have one that just won't close, and sometimes they work perfectly fine. So once you load that on, you've got a bungee, and I just attach my regular clamp to that. Now these clamps are pretty heavy, so what that does is it pulls the side down, and then when your ruler gets close to it, it hits it, okay? We don't want that. So a way to counteract that is to take a nice little dowel rod, put it under your bungee, and let it sit right there so you can see it, so that it holds that ruler base up. Now my machine's gonna have to get through. Okay. And I just try to keep it up off the machine, so I move that bar back to right under the handle of this red clamp so that this can sit as low to my table as possible without actually hitting the table when I go over there.